I'm John Travis in Novato, California on the 27th of April, talking to Wendy Warner in I forgot it already,
Langhorne.
Langhorne, Pennsylvania, which is between Philadelphia and New York, I learned, on the Delaware Canal, which I'd never heard of either. And this first time we've met, I'm tracking down leaders in the holistic field that came after my early days that I've not met many of you, but I've been hearing from Bill Manahan and folks like him who the next wave was after the bunch of us crazies in the 70s that started it all. So I'd like to find out more about who you are and why, what led to your choosing this path, and beginning with your birth, like where you were born, siblings, environment, parents, all that kind of stuff. So.
Okay. So I am number 5 of 6 kids. My parents are both from Ohio. My dad grew up on a farm in Southwest Ohio near Dayton. And my mom grew up in Columbus. They met in college at OSU. And he was veterinarian. And they had their first couple of kids while they still lived near Columbus. And then they moved to Kentucky. And he went from an entirely large animal practice in Ohio to a mixed practice in Kentucky. And that's when I was born there. And 3 months later, he moved the family to Tennessee, to Memphis, which is where I grew up. And at that point, he had only a small animal practice. And all 6 of us kids worked with him off and on when we were in high school and college. And so for the longest time, I was sure I was going to be a veterinarian. And somewhere along the line in high school, I said, you know, the animals are fine. The owners are the people who I don't think I could deal with, because people get a little funny about their animals. You know, they either don't want to do anything for a pet because it was a free pet from the, pound, or they want to do everything when they should just let the poor animal go. Right around that time, I had reason, as middle teenager, had reason to see a gynecologist. My mom took me to her gynecologist, who was an old white guy. And it wasn't, he took good care of me, but he was so condescending. I don't know that he actually patted me on the head, but it felt like it. And I just remember thinking, nobody should have to get treated like that. So after a while, it hit me that I should probably go to medical school. And I knew that I wanted to do OBGYN. Now, the sister that's just older than me is a nurse, and she worked in labor and delivery. And so I had sort of, as I was making these decisions, she was already, starting to work and telling stories about the delivery room. And so I went to college early. I actually ended up leaving at the end of my junior year of high school, because that last year as a senior, I realized every single class was going to be an AP class, and it would just be easier to just go to college.
Yeah.
And I was going to save my parents a ton of money, because I was going to a state college, and they had me in this expensive little prep school. And so I said, see, I could save you money. And of course, my father goes, the fact that the boyfriend's already there has got nothing to do with it, right? Which that was also a draw. So college was great. I loved it. I worked too hard. I was one of those really obnoxious pre-meds that probably spent way too much time worrying about grades and not enough time having fun. When I applied to med school, it always surprises me now to listen to young people who are applying to med school, and they're applying to millions of schools. I went to college at the University of Tennessee because it was a state college and it was inexpensive, and my parents had 6 children to educate. So I literally didn't apply anywhere else for college. So when it came time to apply for medical school, I applied for the University of Tennessee at Memphis, I did actually start an application for a brand new med school that was opening in Johnson City in East Tennessee. But as soon as I got early admission to UT Memphis, I didn't even finish the application process for Johnson City. And it never crossed my mind that I needed to apply to more than one school. Which, looking back, I'm thinking, how was I so cocky to just assume I was going to get admitted? But anyway, totally hated the first 2 years of medical school, because I am somebody who wants to do things. I don't want to sit in class all day long. I went to med school to learn to take care of people. And I remember complaining the whole first year and a half, just, it feels like grad school. I'm sitting in class all day long. I mean, I like the anatomy lab because at least we were doing stuff, but I was really frustrated, so that it was only because back then we didn't really get our little white coat and go to the hospital until the very end of the second year. And that's when I finally said, okay, I can do this. This will be fun. And I knew going into med school that I wanted to do OB, and my parents started teasing me saying, well, what if you get to that rotation and you hate it? And I said, well, if I hate it, I'm in real trouble, because I really don't want to take care of sick people. Because if you think about it, an OBGYN doesn't really take care of a lot of sick people. We do a lot of well women visits, pregnancy, not a lot of chronic illness, or at least that's what I thought. As it turns out, I totally loved the delivery room. I just loved it. And my sister was working in labor and delivery at the University Medical Center where I was on rotation. And we were both married and had both changed our names, and we don't really look all that much alike. She's blonde. And so we decided not to tell anybody that we were sisters when we were on rotation together. And it was I guess about a 10-week long rotation. And right at the end of the rotation, she did something that really irritated me right in the middle of the delivery room. And I just turned to her and started fussing at her the way sisters do. Oh. And everyone's going, oh my God, Wendy's yelling at the charge nurse. And I finally just went, no, come here. And I put my arm around her and I went, we're sisters. It's okay. Anyway, that's my favorite medical school story. All through medical school and I came up to Philadelphia for residency. That's how I ended up in the Northeast. And I just did straight conventional medicine. It never crossed my mind to do things any other way. I mean, I think the closest I came to questioning it was, and I don't know if this ever happened to you, but you know how in med school they teach you anatomy and physiology and then pathophysiology? And I'm going along and this is all fine. And then they're teaching us treatments. And I remember it crossing my mind, wait a second, the way this drug works has nothing to do with the pathophysiology. So we're not really fixing the problem, we're just fixing the symptoms. I remember that sort of crossing my mind. But you're in med school, you got an exam you got to pass. So I kind of forgot about it for many years until I got out into practice. And I know you're going to wonder where I finally hopped on board with holistic medicine, but when you're an OBGYN resident and you are chronically sleep deprived, in general, we're just kind of, I don't know, grouchy. And we all were, so I really didn't think too much about it. And then when I got out into practice and I realized that, oh no, this isn't just being grouchy, this is really horrible PMS. And I laid into an employee early on in my first practice, and she had done something bad, but I was very unprofessional. And I realized, yeah, no, this is hormones. And my business partner at the time said, Wendy, you can't be doing this every month. We have to get this under control. And of course, as a conventional gynecologist, at the time I was trained that for the 3 or 4 days out of the month that I was a pain in the neck, I was supposed to take Prozac every single day. And I went, yeah, not doing that. Really? Yeah.
It would work fast enough to make any difference. I thought Prozac took some time to build up levels.
Oh, Yeah, they said, you'd be a cycle or two before it worked, but you'd have to take the Prozac every single day for the 3 or 4 days out of the month that you yelled at people. So I went, no, I have too many side effects. So at around that time, I was already getting interested in studying botanical medicine. My parents are were both gardeners. My dad could make anything grow. That's just, he was a farm boy. He could make anything grow. My mom was the kind of gardener that she could tell you about the plants and tell you about their botanical names and tell you about all the different hybrids and all of that. And she's a good gardener, but, we used to walk around and mom would tell me all about the plants and dad would tell me how to make it grow. And then later when I started teaching myself botanical medicine, I could then tell them what it was good for. So we used to have fun walking around their garden. So it made sense to me to look first, if I wasn't going to do conventional practice for myself, it made sense for me to learn botanical medicine. Now, we're talking early 90s. There were very few, if any, CME courses for physicians in holistic medicine, right? And none that I could find in botanicals specifically. So I started going to herbal conferences that were designed for professional herbalists. And I know the one that I really loved, and I still every now and then go, it's called Medicines from the Earth. It's always held in Black Mountain, North Carolina, literally on the side of the hill. And the first time I went, I did find, there were probably 200 people there. I found 3 other MDs, a naturopath or 2, a nurse, and maybe an acupuncturist, and everybody else was a professional herbalist. Now, when I go back, it's totally different. It's like 50% MDs and, a bunch of NDs and a bunch of nurses. But, that was the 1990s when it was kind of unusual. Now, I got my own PMS under control with herbs. It was great, but I didn't use it in practice because I was the new kid in the block and I didn't want people to think I was some kind of crazy person. So I kept my mouth shut. And then there was a day that there was a patient I knew pretty well, and she's complaining about the same symptoms that I had just learned how to manage. So I took my prescription pad and I'm thinking to myself, oh, I am shooting myself in the foot. There is no way this is going to ruin my career, but I'm going to do it anyway because it works. So I wrote on my prescription pad, go to this health food store, get this brand of supplement, take it for 3 days, 3 months, call me back. So she calls me back and she goes, first of all, my husband says, thank you very much. And second of all, my girlfriend's husband says, thank you very much, because I told her about it too. And I'm thinking, okay, great. Now maybe I'm not going to get run out of the county. And that gave me the courage to go ahead and continue on this pathway to think, well, I can actually help these people. Because by about this time in practice, I was a year or 2 into practice, it started hitting me that they never told me as a gynecologist how to balance people's hormones. I mean, they never really did. On a conventional practice as a gynecologist, if somebody has a hormone imbalance and they don't want to get pregnant, you put them on birth control pills. And if they have a hormone imbalance and they do want to get pregnant, it's almost always PCOS. And so you treat it that way with, a couple of different drugs. But they never really told me how to fix the underlying problem. Like if someone's bleeding really heavy, well, you just do a hysterectomy or something short of that. They never told me how to fix the underlying issue. So it was lovely to start learning ways to actually get to the underlying problem. And I also ended up getting very interested in energy medicine. So I got trained in Reiki initially. And all this time, I'm still in a conventional OBGYN practice, and it's getting bigger. It started off just 2 of us, and then it ended up being 8 of us.
Wow.
And, you can imagine what that's like. If you've got a practice busy enough to keep 8 physicians busy, you don't sleep when you're on call. There's a bunch of stuff going on, and you run like a crazy person. And it also became, right at first, in the first few years of my conventional practice, it was okay because we had enough time and I could actually let people labor the way God intends us to labor. And I could do breech deliveries and I could do all of that stuff. Well, between the practice changing and being in Pennsylvania and it being the late 90s, early 2000s, the malpractice situation in Pennsylvania for OBs just was crazy. Everybody sued everybody for anything. And the cost of our malpractice premiums were getting skyrocketing. And so the other business partners of mine decided we needed to sort of, rein things in. And I would sort of get fussed at if I had let somebody just sort of labor and I didn't intervene with some Pitocin or something to keep them moving. And I started realizing that I was getting pushed more and more into practicing in a way that I was uncomfortable with, because it was all about intervention and it was all about over testing to cover our butts. And I'm trying to do that to keep my partners happy. At the same time, I'm learning all of this information about herbs and energy. And I was going to AHMA meetings and, learning all of that stuff. And the only thing that saved me initially is, you remember when the women's health paper came out talking about hormones? And it was like 2002, talking about how bad the hormones were. And so everybody initially wanted to get off their hormones and they were all symptomatic. And I was the only one in the practice that knew how I could get people off of hormones without making them crazy, and that could give them herbs and things to support them instead. And so that was the only time my business partners found that part of my knowledge helpful. They said, well, we don't know what to do, but make an appointment with Wendy. She'll get you all straightened out. And to this day, I think that the handouts that I wrote in 2002 are still being used in that practice. Eventually, things sort of came to a head and I was unhappy and they were unhappy, and sort of overnight at a business meeting, we had a blow up, and overnight I didn't have a job. So I started my current practice 16 and a half years ago. And my current practice, technically it's my practice, but I share space with 7 other practitioners and they do varying different modalities and treatments. There's a full-time acupuncturist, TCM practitioner. There's a Shin Tai practitioner. There's a Rolfer. There's a Rubenfeld synergist. There's a stress management expert who teaches heart math practices. There's a health coach. I'm trying to think who I'm forgetting. There's a shamanic practitioner. There's a bunch of us all under one roof. Oh, there's a local DO who comes in just to do osteopathic manipulation. He's a conventional family practitioner a couple of miles away, but he comes to this office just to do OMT. So I've got this great group of people that I work with. I learned when I was in my old practice, if I decided somebody would really benefit from acupuncture, for instance, I would give them a person's name to go see. But what would end up happening is that before they saw that practitioner, some well-meaning family member would go, oh, well, go see this person instead. And if that person wasn't as good, then my patient decided acupuncture didn't work, right? So it was really nice to have everybody under one roof, because that way you could kind of help control who the patient's seeing, and we can learn from each other. Like, I've worked with the acupuncturist long enough now that I kind of feel semi-bilingual. Like, if she talks about what meridians are off, it kind of helps reinforce what I'm looking at, even though I haven't been to TCM school. And then over the years, in addition to, getting this practice up and running, I've done additional training in herbal medicine. I don't know if you know the herbalist David Winston, but he's got a fabulous 2-year course and a couple of grad courses that I've done. And what year was it? I'd been going to AHMA meetings, and then when the ABIHM was formed and they announced their certification, I, of course, was a little bit, oh gosh, I wonder if I really know enough to take a test, because it isn't like there's a residency that you've done that, you're sure you've been taught everything you need to know. So I didn't take it the first time it was offered, but I did go to their, I think it was their first review course. I went through the review course, but did not take the exam at that point. 6 months later, they were having the exam at, while we were at the AHMA meeting, and so I took it then. So that was early on, I don't know, 2001, 2002, I forget. At the conference, the first review course I went to, Rob Ibker and Bill Manahan were the course organizers. And they said something like, well, we know that there are a lot of you in the audience who've been doing this a long time, and you probably have already been up and doing talks in your own community. So if there's a talk you think we need to include, please let us know. If you think you can do a better job than one of these talks, let us know. Well, the year that I went, the women's health talk I thought was really lacking. And so when they said, let us know, I sent them an email and said, no offense, but I thought that talk really kind of was horrible. I've already been doing these kind of talks in my community, both for lay people and for conventional colleagues. So, you know, if you want me to, I'd be happy to come work with you. And they were doing a little mini course here in Philadelphia at the Osteopathic College. So they invited me to do a talk at that one because I was local. It would be cheap. They wouldn't have to, you know, transport me anywhere. And that was sort of like my audition. And the next thing I know, I'm on the teaching faculty for ABIHM. And then it sort of happens that, you know, I'm on the board of directors, and then I was the president of the board for a few years. When the ABIHM, and I know you've heard all of this lingo because you've talked to enough people at this point.
Well, I'm thinking we should clarify for viewers that may not know,
Okay.
like PCM is traditional Chinese medicine, and AHMA is American Holistic Medical Association, and I'm not sure, the American Board of Integrative.
The American Board, well, initially it was the American Board of Holistic Medicine.
Right.
That a few years into it, we added in the Integrative Holistic Medicine, so the name changed to ABIHM. So by the time I was board chair, it was the ABIHM. The ABIHM and the AHMA sort of got back together again. ABIHM came from the AHMA initially. When the certification exam was given away to another organization, ABIHM and AHMA went back to being together, and that organization is now called the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine.
Right.
And that's when, well, the AHMA at that point had already invited other non-medical doctors, other practitioners into the fold. And so that's why it was also appropriate to change the name to AIHM. So I was on the board there for a short period of time, and I did do some lecturing for them as well. Haven't spoken for them for a couple of years. I currently am on the teaching faculty for the Institute for Functional Medicine. And I do the women's hormone day of the 5-day basic course that they teach. And I'm also on the faculty that does the hormone module. So, you know, I remember when the ABIHM board was talking about the whole idea of, should we give up our exam and just be an educational body? We looked at each other and said, okay, what is it we actually care about? Do we care about doing an exam, or do we care about teaching people? And we all looked at each other and went, we care about teaching people. We don't really care about the exam. So it was easy to give the exam away. And I think to a person, and I know I felt this way, we've always thought, you know, if you're a clinician, that's great, but there's a limited number of people that you're going to be able to impact just, you know, in your daily work with patients. But if I can go educate another practitioner to work the way I work, then they go home and they impact so many more patients. And so it has this big ripple effect, which is why, you know, I can't imagine not continuing to teach people the rest of my life.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And it was amazing because the group that we had on the faculty of ABIHM for all those years, that was a really amazing group of folks because we were doing it because we loved what we were doing. Trust me, we were not getting compensated at all to speak of. And we all got to know each other super well. And there was very strong leadership in the organization. And so it was a very tight, cohesive group. I learned so much from those people. You know, folks like Lev Linkner and Alan Warshawski and Scott Shannon and Lee Lipsenthal and Patrick Hanaway, and, you know, Mimi was part of that. Mimi Guarneri was part of that group. Nan Sudak didn't really like to lecture much, but she was a great executive director. Bob Anderson was one of the first guys in the group that, I mean, Bob proctored the exam that I took. When it was my turn to take the ABIHM exam, Bob proctored it. It was only like 18 of us in a hotel room. And that was the other thing that I don't know if anybody that you've spoken to talked about how we originally did our exams.
No.
I hate taking exams. I really do. I hate taking exams, and it makes me crazy to this day. So we wanted to make the exam experience as pleasant as possible. So imagine this is back in the days before you had to do it on a computer, and we actually had those little, you know, forms with the little circles that you had to do with your number 2 pencils. So imagine a big ballroom, all, you know, a couple of hundred people spread out in this ballroom. On the screens up front, just quietly scrolling through, were beautiful pictures of nature.
Mm.
In the back, there were massage therapists where you could get a free chair massage if you needed to take a break. We had fed them breakfast. I always brought Rescue Remedy to pass out to anybody who needed it. We decided not to play any music. We were going to do that, but we decided that would be too distracting. So we tried to make the experience as pleasant as possible. It was lovely. And of course, now that it's on computer, it's a whole different ballgame, because we had to switch over to the computer system also the last couple of years that ABIHM was doing it. And now, of course, when I do my recertification for my conventional OBGYN boards, I have to go to the computer. And when I did my IFM certification, I had to go to the computer places. And it's crazy. It's very intimidating. And, you know, security cameras looking at you, and they're scanning your palms every time you turn around. It's not the same at all. I kept pretending that I was going to an ABIHM course as I drove to the computer spot, just in case.
Yeah, well, that's a great story. And you
Yeah.
mentioned Bob. I'm sad that I missed being able to interview him, because I first heard of him in the 70s, back when I was in Seattle at a American, it was the Association for Humanistic Psychology. I think he was at one of those meetings, and yeah, a legend.
Totally, a lovely man. Never saw him, well, I saw him riled up, but his idea of riled up and how I express riled up are very different. Just fabulous energy, great knowledge, was always a very grounding presence for our board, and a great, just huge amount of knowledge. I mean, Bob's big book, he went through, did you ever see Bob's big book?
No.
Bob started collecting, he, like most of us, got tired of having people say, there is no science behind this. So he started collecting journal articles, abstracts, anything he could find that had to do with the science of nutrients, vitamins, energy work, botanicals, anything that was like non-conventional. And he self-published it. The last copy I've got was about this thick,
Wow.
double-sided, very small print. And we used to joke that the next time somebody told me that there was no science, I was just going to go and drop it on their foot and hope nothing broke. Because it was great. I mean, it was very important to him to make sure people understood that there was science behind this. And that's important to all of us because, you know, the science behind all of this is what's really important, you know, because that's the only way we'll be able to really get it across to our conventional colleagues that it is not something to turn your nose up at. It's interesting, when I left my conventional OBGYN practice and started my current one, I specifically, purposefully stayed in the same community because I wanted, I mean, I was already known as a good doc here, and my colleagues in other specialties already knew me, and I wanted them to see, well, okay, you know me as a good doc, so obviously what I'm doing can't be too crazy. It took a few years, but I started getting some referrals from some of my colleagues. There's still a few that get kind of frustrated with me because, of course, if you do integrated functional medicine, I do a lot more than just women's health at this point. I mean, on one level, I basically function like a family doc with a specialty in women's health because, I mean, I see people for diabetes and heart disease and all kinds of things. The cardiologists in the area are not typically very happy with me because I tell their patients a lot of things that are different from what they're hearing from their cardiologist. And the GI docs probably don't like me very much because I get all of their patients off of their PPIs. But other than that, I mean, I don't know exactly what people say about me in the community, but I do get the occasional referral.
Say more about what you tell the cardiology patients that.
Well, in conventional cardiology, in this area at least, they're still focusing on just statins and getting the LDL down, and they don't really talk to their patients about why the LDL goes up.
Yeah.
And that it's about inflammation, and it's about, you know, if you have a high LDL, what's the particle size? And, you know, all of that. And does your HDL work appropriately? And all of that, you know, more advanced testing that we have now. And I did years ago, I asked a cardiologist in the area that's, you know, relatively friendly with me. And I said, why do you not get advanced lipid testing on everybody that walks in your office?
Yeah.
I mean, insurance pays for it generally. So like, why wouldn't you? And you're seeing all the really sick people. I'm seeing people that are kind of healthy and only have a little bit of problem, you know? And he goes, well, you don't really need it. I said, well, why wouldn't you need it? Because, you know, statin's not going to affect the particle size. And I think he just looks at treatment very differently. And then there's that whole issue of a cardiologist will have a man on a statin and get his LDL, his total cholesterol down so low that he no longer can make testosterone.
Yeah.
And so I have to point that out to some of my, because I do see men now, and, you know, I have to point that out to men. It's like, yeah, I could put you on testosterone replacement, but couldn't we just like let your cholesterol come up a little bit and you could make your own? So we do a lot of round and about. And so I do sometimes have to say to my patients, listen, I'm just going to warn you before I start talking that every single thing that's going to come out of my mouth is going to be in exact opposition to your cardiologist who you also love. And I apologize because it puts you in between two people that you like, and you have to figure out who to listen to.
Yeah.
And I do feel bad when that happens. I feel very bad when that happens.
It's sad that the silo effect of the conventional specialties just doesn't get what knowledge is available.
Right.
Yeah.
And even when I've made copies of articles and handed it to the patient and said, here, next time you see your cardiologist or gastroenterologist, whoever, hand this to them. I don't know if those articles get read, which is kind of a shame.
Yeah.
Another really great story about doing this kind of medicine versus what I used to do. You know, the main labs, Quest and LabCorp and those people, they keep track of pap smear results because they are also medical legally responsible. If an abnormal pap comes back, they've got to make sure that it gets followed up appropriately. So they actually do these monthly pap reports on every single practitioner who sends them any samples. So one day, this was 12, 14 years ago, my Quest rep happened to be at the front desk when I came out to the front, and she said, "Oh, I ran the pap report this month, and do you know that you have the lowest number of abnormal paps of anybody in the area?"
Hmm.
And I went, "Well, that doesn't surprise me. I mean, I'm seeing people mostly who want to be healthy. I'm not seeing people who smoke and go to McDonald's." She goes, "Right. I thought about that." She goes, "But then I looked at your follow-up paps. And did you realize that almost none of your follow-up paps still are abnormal?" And I went, "Yeah, I know, because I tell people what to take to get their immune system in good shape so they keep the virus quiet." And her mouth fell open. She goes, "Wait a minute, what do you do?" I said, "Well, my patients, we talk about how to eat, and we talk about supplements to take to boost their immune system so their immune system keeps the virus quiet and their body has a chance to heal up the cells." She went, "That's all it takes? How come your colleagues don't know that?" And I said, "Well, you know, they read different literature than I do. I don't know." She was pretty flabbergasted. And that's still true. I checked with my current rep, and it's still true that because my follow-up paps almost never come back abnormal.
Hmm. Way to go.
Yeah. The other thing, and you know, when I talk to people about my current practice, pretty much everybody else in the practice does some form of energy work. I mean, you know, acupuncture is basically energy work, and you know, Shin Tai is, and Rubenfeld is, and all of that. And definitely the shamanic practitioner who works with me, she's obviously doing energy work. One of the things that I found in working with patients, because I mean, even with an integrative functional medicine type practice, I'm still doing very much a sort of a biochemical, biomechanical approach. And sometimes it ends up being very clear that if you don't fix the energy field, we're just going to play whack-a-mole.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I fix one symptom, and because the energy field is still screwed up, a different thing pops up later. We fix that, a different thing pops up later, which is kind of why I have these other folks that I can work with, because if I'm not really helping the patient fix the energy field, then I'm kind of wasting my time. You know, I'm keeping them busy while they fix the energy field, but that's really where it has to happen. So I actually a couple years ago did a several-year training with the shamanic practitioner that I work with as well. I'm never going to be seeing clients the way she does, but I think that helps me understand more about what's going on, and it definitely improved my intuition and my ability to listen.
Mm. Wow. I'd like to shift over to the birth side of things, because back in the 90s, after I read the continuum concept and ran into James Prescott's work at NIH, I realized that adult wellness that I was doing was locking the barn door after the horses had left, and that secure attachment is so rare, and what we could do to alter birth. I got involved with the Mother Friendly Childbirth Initiative and helped them get that published and set up their website, and got to know a lot of the pioneers in that whole movement, the midwifery model of letting women's bodies do their own thing, which you picked out early on. So yeah. Tell me what your birth profession, your practice is like. And
well, I don't do OB anymore.
Oh, okay.
Because that
sleep.
It's hard enough to do. It was very difficult to do by the time I hit my early 40s, and I just turned 60, and I am not interested in having that kind of lifestyle anymore. Mm-hmm. So I have fond memories of my first years in practice, when what I was doing on many days was actually midwifery. It wasn't obstetrics.
Mhm.
And I miss those days. I really do. I think what's sad is that the last group of people that we're going to convince to get back to letting birth be the way it's supposed to be are the conventional OBs.
Yeah.
Because it's become, even in the 16 years, almost 17 years that I've been out of OB, it was medicalized when I left, and I think it's gotten worse.
Mhm.
And an expectation, at least in the community where I am, there is a certain expectation that, like, you don't even have to worry about going to childbirth classes because you're going to get your epidural right away and you're going to be comfortable. So why would you need to be able to handle your contractions? You
Mhm.
know, the only real concern right now, because we're relatively far away from Philadelphia, but I'm in the part of the county that's the closest to Philadelphia. We've got a number of COVID cases, and because of that, they've had to change how things are happening in the delivery room. And even testing. My stepdaughter is currently pregnant, and she's in Massachusetts, and she went to get her 20-week anatomy ultrasound, and her mother was going to attend her, but she was not allowed to come back into the ultrasound room. And I know that at that hospital and at my current hospital, my hospital in the community, you may or may not be able to have your partner with you in labor, depending on the situation. I mean, if the baby's father or whoever's going to be with you has a temp or has had any kind of exposure to somebody else, they're not going to let them in the delivery room with you. So can you imagine being a first-time mom and having to labor on your own?
Yeah.
With no support? I just can't imagine.
Apparently home births are increasing in some areas where there are home birth midwives still, but tiny fraction.
Tiny fraction. And at least in Pennsylvania, because of the way the malpractice laws are, it's extremely difficult for certified nurse midwives to do home births because they can't get an OB to cover them, because to be able to pay for your malpractice premium, if you're the OB that covers a home birth, it would be crazy expensive. You wouldn't be able to do it.
Mhm.
And so really you have to rely on a very tiny group of lay midwives and there's not very many in my community.
Yeah.
And, if you're doing true midwifery, you can't have a very big patient population at any one time. So it's tough. It's very tough. When I met my husband, my current husband, I was still in my conventional practice. He was very proud to tell me that his daughter had been born at home. And I don't know, for just a fraction of a second, I just flashed back on all the little preemies and all the problems that they had back in the inner city Philadelphia hospital where I did my training. And I kind of went, oh, she was born at home? Well, she was her mom's third kid, so it's not a big deal. But it was a little funny at first. And he kind of looked at me, and I'll give him a lot of credit. He goes, well, we looked at the risks, and there's risk of being born in a hospital and there's risk of being born at home. And we decided we were okay with the risk of being born at home.
Yeah.
So I'll give him credit for that.
It's a totally different world than tertiary hospital type
Right.
populations. We get
Right.
skewed by our training by what
I think actually the only way we'll be able to get back to having birth be the way it's supposed to be is to increase the number of midwives and decrease the number of obstetricians.
Yeah. And that's not likely to be easy.
It's not likely to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you start paying the midwives what you pay the doctors.
Yeah. That would be nice.
If they do the same work, I don't understand why not. They should at least be a little closer.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been a delight to get to know you and what makes you tick. And you mentioned you met your husband, current husband, what, 15 or 20 years ago? And
About 20 years ago, yeah.
do you have any kids of your own, or your
No, just stepkids.
stepkids, and reaching grandmother age yet, or?
We will be grandparents this summer.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
that's a weird idea. It's a weird idea. No, it's interesting because my all of my 5 siblings have kids, and so I was the only aunt that treated my nieces and nephews just like people instead of like parenting them the way that their other
right.
aunts and uncles did. And so I got to be the cool aunt, you know, which is a nice place to be.
Sure. Interesting distinction that doesn't often get made.
Yeah.
There's a whole movement started in England of decreasing the condescension that is normal for treating kids, and they forgotten the name of that outfit, but it was an eye opener to me to realize, yeah, they are people.
Right. Right.
And
And,
we're
you
born.
know, and it's interesting because my oldest nieces and nephews, of course, are now having kids themselves. And it's interesting to watch them parent, and then to watch my nieces and nephews who have chosen not to have children and how they interact with the grandkids. And it's more like sort of how I used to be.
Yeah.
So that's kind of fun too. It's an interesting dynamic. I have a really big family, so it's an interesting dynamic to watch what's happening.
Uh-huh. Well, any other areas that we've missed or you'd like to?
Well, I think the one thing that I do want to talk about is the whole idea of changing medical education, because the current system doesn't make any sense on many levels. The way we educate medical doctors doesn't make any sense. The way they're trained to practice misses so much.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really, I don't think, get trained in how to interact with other healthcare practitioners as a team. I mean, I think that there's been some movement to try to make that a little better, but I think it's still very much in its infancy. And I think that healthcare in our country in conventional practice is still very MD centric, which may or may not really be appropriate. When I first found functional medicine, well, it's interesting because when I started doing holistic medicine, it just was eye-opening, and these were people who felt like my tribe. And then when I got to functional medicine and really got to learn that way of thinking, it hit me, this works for anybody. I mean, every conventional physician could be trained in the way of thinking of a functional medicine practitioner. It would change a little bit about what they do, because it would have them focus on the basic problems and not just slapping things at symptoms. Of course, doing a good job of functional medicine takes a lot more time than what the typical practitioner is allowed to do under the current way we get compensated. So you kind of have to then change how compensation works, which means all the money that we put into the healthcare system shouldn't be going to the stockholders of the insurance companies. It should be going to the people that are actually involved, the patients and the practitioners. And that's not where the money goes right now. So there's a lot of different steps we need to take, but if we don't, what we're doing isn't making sense, and what we're doing isn't for the long term. So it has to start changing, but it has to change on all these different levels.
Yeah. Bill Manahan made some great points when I interviewed him. Just the upstream, looking upstream. Why is it happening? Yeah.
I mean, I would love to figure out a way to get more conventional practitioners, people that are already in practice, to just listen in on some basic functional medicine thinking, and maybe doing a little more holistic thinking as well, and just see if it still fits in with what they're doing. You know, the problem, of course, is that if you've been in practice a long time and you've got a lot of time and energy and money invested in the way you currently do things, it's kind of hard to turn your back on that.
It is, yeah.
And what happens, I think, a lot of times is young people come into medical training very idealistic, very interested in learning functional medicine or whatever, and then they get kind of brainwashed.
Yeah.
The farther they get into their training, it's really a shame. I've seen that happen a couple of times with students that started with me. You know, they started with me they were my patient in college, and then in DO school, and then residency. And by the time this one young woman got to be a resident, she didn't want to have anything to do with me anymore because she decided that the way I practice makes no sense.
Yeah, it's a powerful culture, and the enculturation process is not to be underestimated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. I'm going to wrap up the recording here, and